Peep the title of the stream, my PC part disaster. In just a moment, I'll be telling you guys the story of what went wrong this morning when I decided, you know what? Let me try and put together some upgrades for my PC. Things almost couldn't have gone worse. In a stream either earlier this week or late last week, I mentioned that I had purchased some new parts for my PC. That included a RAM upgrade. I upgraded from 32 gigs of RAM to 64 gigs of RAM. So yeah, I got the RAM upgrade and I got a Core i9 processor, upgrading from the i7 8700K processor in my PC. I also want to get the RTX 30 series card, specifically the 3080, but at this point I'll take any 30 series I can get my hands on. Kyla's all saying, why do you need so much RAM? It's a ridiculous amount of RAM, isn't it? It's absolutely ridiculous. And maybe it wasn't necessary, but I just figured having more RAM will help me edit videos more. And I often open a lot of programs when it comes to making videos. I have After Effects, Premiere Pro, Flash, my web browser open, a bunch of stuff. It's not really a necessary upgrade, but it is all part of future-proofing my build. So I was like, let me get that 64 gigs. I think that'll be cool. So initially I was like, okay, let me wait until I get a 3080 before I, you know, go ahead and install the new parts. But I have no idea when I'm gonna get a 3080. I've reached out to Mitch. If anyone knows Mitch, I mean, you will know him if you're a part of the Discord server at any point. He's a big guy into computers and building PCs. So I was like, hey, might you have a connection that could hook me up with a 3080? Because as we know, the crypto, what do they call them? Crypto bros are taking up all the freaking graphics cards. They're just buying them all up. They're using bots to buy them. So I'm like, okay, let me see if I can get a connection. So I'm gonna see if I can get one. This morning I woke up and I was like, hey, let me just get whatever performance boosts I can get out of this computer right now. So I bring the PC out and I want to upgrade the RAM and I want to put this processor inside my computer. I haven't really fiddled with the processor or the RAM in a long time. I have opened up my PC a few times to replace and install some parts. For example, I got the Elgato 4K60, which is a PCI Express, has a PCI Express interface. And so I have opened it up and put it in there. But now I'm actually opening sort of the top part of the PC. So I'm unscrewing the water cooling system I have. I put that to the side. And I got this tube of thermal paste because I knew that if I'm replacing the CPU, I'm gonna have to replace that thermal paste. So I take it, I get some tissue, I'm wiping off the old thermal paste off the top of the water cooler base and off the base of the water cooler and off the top of the old CPU, which was the i7. I wipe it off, I put it to the side. I then figure, okay, let me put in the new RAM first because that's more tucked in. I replace the RAM, no problem, that's easy. No, it's just goes off without a hitch. I'm like, all right, that's cool. Let me put in the new CPU. Retro Destroyer is saying Tamago knows his PCs. I mean, yeah, you know, you just watch a few videos. Eventually, it's like, okay, I know what to do. Also, I did computer science, so I know about the components that go inside a PC as well. I installed a new chip. I just put it on. You know how you replace it? You just place it down, and then you put the clamp down on it. I'm applying the thermal paste. Now here's the thing. I watched a video a couple of days ago about the best way to apply thermal paste to the top of a CPU. So I'm like, okay. And I was thinking, here's the thing. This is the thing that gets me. I was like, should I watch that video again just to make sure I'm doing it right? And then I thought, no, I remember. The best way is just to get full coverage. You know, you want full coverage so that the paste is all over the top. That's the best way to do it. So I start squeezing. It comes in a syringe, right? So I start squeezing this. I do a square around the edge and I do an X in the middle. And I'm like, all right, that's fine, that's fine. I close the chassis. I put the CPU cover on top. Oh, not the CPU, the water cooler on top. And then I'm like, okay, let's see how the coverage looks, you know, because I want to make sure it sort of covers the whole CPU. I then pull it on, because obviously if I place the water cooler on top, it should spread out what I've done, right? I pull it off. The freaking thermal paste was so much Retro Destroyer already knows what I did wrong. It was so much that it had spilled onto the edges of the whole thing. I was like, oh my freaking God, I put too much thermal paste. So I'm like, okay, wait. I can fix this. The thermal paste syringe, it comes with a little like tiny spatula so that you can spread it. I started trying to scrape the thermal paste off that had just spilled onto the edges. And I'm like, okay, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. As long as no thermal paste got on the actual pins of the CPU, it's fine. So I'm like, okay, let me make sure that didn't happen. After I've scraped off a decent amount of the thermal paste, I lift up the CPU, and there's just tiny bits seeping around the edges. I'm like, crap. All right, you know what? This is fine. This is fine. I take some tissue. I start wiping around the edge of the CPU. What happened was, because there was so much thermal paste, right? When I was holding it and then I turned it to wipe the other edge, the part of my hand that was holding the CPU actually had some thermal paste on it. Thermal paste is so freaking sticky. I didn't know how sticky it was. I ended up getting thermal paste on the bottom of the CPU, literally the place you're not supposed to get it on. I was like, oh my God, this is a freaking disaster. So I put it to the side. And I start Googling, okay, how to remove thermal paste from CPU. I Googled this on my phone, because obviously I can't do it on my computer, because my computer is freaking having surgery right now. I Google it. I'm like, all right, how do you remove thermal paste from the CPU? And they're saying, okay, you want to use rubbing alcohol, Q-tips, a toothpick. I'm like, all right, we're gonna do this. Let's freaking. I don't have rubbing alcohol. What I have, as you know, if you're a regular to the stream, you'll know I have these lens wipes that I use from time to time to wipe my glasses, and they have alcohol in them. So I'm like, okay, I'll use this to clean it. So I'm using the lens wipe to wipe the edges of this new CPU chip. And I'm like, I am messing this up so badly. The thermal paste is so sticky. It's like, the more I touched it, the more I got on to the freaking CPU. I was like, what's going on? How is this happening? Like, legit, I was so stressed. Simi, I'd have paid money to see you struggle live. This is happening at like 8:15 in the morning. I had literally just woken up. I was like, this cannot be happening. But I was like, okay, you know what? This is fine. I can clean the bottom of the CPU. That's fine. I just need to make sure that the pins on the motherboard are okay. Because as long as the pins on the motherboard are fine, then that means I can always just put in my old CPU. I can just put in the old one and it'll work fine. So I go to inspect. I'm like, okay, are the pins of the old CPU fine? There's a tiny bit of thermal paste just on the edge of where the pins are. I'm like, okay, this isn't a complete disaster. Let me get my toothpick. Let me just freaking, you know, I'm just real quick scraping the edge, trying to get that paste off. And I'm like, hey, how about I do this? Let me get a lens wipe and let me just gently, very gently wipe the edge, or wipe that edge too. Now these lens wipes, you know, do I need to clean my glasses? I would show you, but I don't want to waste a lens wipe. But the whole idea, right? Why is there a tiny bit of thermal paste everywhere? It's so sticky. It's because it's so sticky, right? So the thing with the lens wipe is that it is, think of it like a wet wipe, right? It's not quite as soft as a wet wipe, but it's the same basic idea. So when I was wiping it, some fibers actually got stuck onto the pins because of the fact that the pins are quite sharp. Obviously, they're only meant to hold a CPU, not freaking lens wipe fibers. So I'm like, now I have to remove these freaking fibers from the CPU hole. So I'm Googling how to do that. It says use a toothbrush. So then I go and get a freaking fresh toothbrush, right? And I'm freaking using the toothbrush. Things just keep going wrong. I'm using the toothbrush to remove the fibers from the place where you place the CPU. It's so long. It's honestly so long. Eventually, I managed to clean it up and get it okay. I put the processor back in. There's a lot less thermal paste on it, but there's still enough on it, right? So I put the processor back in, the i9. I screw everything back. I put it back where it went to go. I plugged everything in. I clicked to turn the computer on, and I'm just like, please tell me I didn't mess this up, right? I click to turn the computer on. I hear the functioning. I hear the fans, but the computer is not turning on. And I know something especially is wrong because the USB hub I have that plugs into the motherboard at the back of the computer is not turning on either. So I'm like, this is a CPU problem. There's something wrong with the CPU. And I'm like, well, I hope it's something wrong with the CPU, because if it's something wrong with the motherboard, that's going to be a much worse problem. I take out the computer, I unplug everything, I take out the i9 processor, and I start cleaning off more of the thermal paste, thinking maybe that's the problem. Maybe there's so much thermal paste that it's causing issues with my computer turning on. Simi is now thermophobic. Nah, we love thermal paste. Thermal paste is a necessity. I guess I liked it a bit too much, and that was the problem. Retro Destroy saying, I think it's a CPU and motherboard problem, TAMAGO. Right. Well, I was thinking it's either one of those two, or it's the RAM. Because when I first built a PC back in 2015, when I initially plugged it in to turn it on, it also didn't turn on. And then I found a tutorial that said if you get the RAM and then wipe it on a surface, like your shirt or your trousers, it'll work. And I did that and it worked. So that's the first thing I did. I took out all the RAM and I just wiped it. I was like, okay, maybe the RAM's a problem. Put it back in, turned the computer on again, did not work. I'm like, okay, it's not the RAM. Let's go back. Let's see the CPU. I take the CPU out. I'm taking off more of the thermal paste. There's no way you stayed as calm as you are now. Well, you have to stay calm. In my mind is like that SpongeBob meme. This is what my mind was like. Funnily enough, that's what my computer looked like as well. I'm just like thinking, okay, please don't be the motherboard. Because if it's the motherboard, that means my PC is effed. And I have like meetings today. It's going to be a complete disaster. If it's just the CPU, that means I can just get it replaced and returned. Because the thing is, I don't know if I mentioned this on stream. I don't think I did. My CPU arrived like this, okay? You ready? Look at this. This is how it arrived when it came. You notice that? It came with the security seal already opened. So I was thinking like, that's not right. That's not how it's supposed to be, right? Like, it's not supposed to be like that. Excuse me. Why is the security seal open? That's not right. So what I did was, I called customer service and I was like, hey, so I received this thing and it was like open already. So I just wanted to know like, what's going on with that? Dude was like, oh yeah, sorry, it's not supposed to be like that. Would you like a return? You know, we can offer you a return, maybe a replacement, but yeah. And then I was looking on the Amazon website and this is no longer in stock. Like, I got this for like 370 and it was no longer in stock. And so there were only resellers and someone was reselling it for 600 and something pounds. And I'm like, well, if this doesn't work, I'm not going to be able to get another one from Amazon. So I was like, okay, let me just see. Maybe it was a return and maybe it would work. So there was already something in my mind thinking, maybe this thing just straight up doesn't work. But then there's also the part of my mind which is like, maybe I have broken my PC. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? Is this not working or is my PC broken? So what I did to test it was I put my i7 processor back into the computer. Now, obviously I have a lot of thermal paste around still, so I'm cleaning. Like, my morning was literally me trying to clean thermal paste as gently as possible. Now, imagine trying to clean a substance which is extremely sticky, but trying to do it delicately because it's on an extremely fragile piece of hardware. Like, it's the most freaking, the dichotomy of the situation is ridiculous. It's like, how do you even do that? Eventually, I feel like I get a good amount of the thermal paste off, and I put the i7 processor back in. At this point, I'm not putting everything back before I plug it in and turn it on. I literally have the skeleton of the PC and I'm turning it on. Oh crap, do you know what? I forgot a detail. Which also made me think I broke my computer. Right before I even... I need to mention this detail. Okay. Before I even put in the new processor, while I was unscrewing the water cooler, I unscrewed one screw, put it away. Second screw, put it away. Third screw, put it away. Now the fourth screw was kind of tucked in a corner, so it was really hard to maneuver and pull the screw out. So when I unscrewed it and I went to reach, it fell in the computer. So now I have this screw inside of my computer and I'm like, how do I get this out? Like, it's just inside the computer. I can hear it in the computer, but I don't know how to get it. So I'm like, okay, let me pick up the computer and like try to rattle it out of the computer. Cause I'm like, how else am I gonna freaking get it out? I literally don't know where it is inside my computer. I pick it up and I'm like turning it and turning it and turning it, and I can hear it. Like it's like a coin inside a box. I can hear it like ting, ting. I'm like, all right, come on, get out of there, get out of there. Now the thing is, right, I'm holding the PC and I feel like I'm holding it securely, but it turns out I'm holding it by the front panel and the top panel of the PC. And anyone who has built a custom PC knows that the panels are removable. And the PC is quite heavy. So before I've even put in the processor or taken out anything, I'm holding the PC, the panels come off, this thing lands on the floor, and now there's literally a hole in my wooden floor from where the PC landed, because all of its weight landed on one corner, and there's literally a hole in my floor right now. So that's how this whole thing started. I dropped it and I was like, flipping hell. Simi let the PS5 fall, now his PC. I was like, flipping hell. Like literally, I'm gonna show you, right? Okay, I've just removed the front panel from my PC. So I was holding it like this, and then it just fell off. And so I was holding this and my PC was on the floor. And I'm like, that was the first in a series of tragic events. You guys seeing this? This is the hole in my floor from where the PC dropped, right? If I were to say how deep it is, it's like I can fit my finger in there, basically. And like, that's just in my floor now. That's just in my floor. I'm like, I didn't need that, to be honest. I really didn't need that. So that's just to tell you, like, things were going wrong from the very start. Buy a tiny rug for the hole, like literally just a rug for the hole, yeah. And your PC still works. See, now that's the thing, right? So let me continue the story. So the computer wasn't turning on, and I'm like, okay, if when I put the i7 processor in, you know, the regular processor, and it still doesn't turn on, that means I've effed up my computer. But if I put the i7 processor in, it works, that means that the i9 processor is what the problem was. I put the i7 processor in, I plug only my monitors in. At this point, I can't even be bothered to plug in the keyboard and everything, because I'm gonna have to like take it apart anyway. So I just plug in the monitors, turn it on, and I'm waiting. Boom. The ROG logo, the Asus ROG logo comes up. I'm like, thank God my PC is not broken. Oh my God. So I'm like, okay. Maybe the reason it's working, I see people writing PC shenanigans. Maybe the reason it's working is because I got enough of the thermal paste off. So I'm like, let me try the i9 processor one more time, just to be sure it's okay. Just to be sure that it's not the i9 processor that has a problem. I put the i9 in, try it again, it doesn't turn on. So it turns out, or at least I'm convinced, that it's not anything I did which resulted in this thing not working. I'm convinced that the reason this was open when it arrived is because this was something that someone else had already returned because it wasn't working, and then they sold it to me, and now I filed for this thing to be returned for a full refund. And honestly, I want compensation for my pain and suffering, because literally, if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have a hole in my floor. I wouldn't have had that trauma with freaking thermal paste. I mean, come on, like, it was It was an absolute disaster, wasn't it? So you don't think dropping the PC broke it? Well, I wouldn't have had anything to do with the freaking i9 processor at that point. And I also checked all my storage drives just to make sure dropping the PC didn't like mess things up. Wait, so the motherboard is cool. It turns out the motherboard is okay. Everything was okay. The problem was the processor. What I did afterwards is I just wanted more performance for my processor. So I just overclocked the i7 I have now. I've overclocked it so that instead of running at the base 3.7 gigahertz, it's running at 4.7 gigahertz. The temperature is slightly higher, but not a ridiculous temperature. It's running at like 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, which I think is okay when, you know, it's running at that temperature idle, which I think is okay. But if anyone knows more about computers than I do and they're saying 50 degrees Celsius idle isn't good, let me know. But I think that's all right. But yeah, I filed for this to be returned to the States. I never want to see this thing again. What a freaking morning I had. I also, dude, moral of the story, just put a tiny bit of, just a pea-sized bit of thermal paste in the center and move on with your life. The way I was doing a whole freaking X inside a box, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You don't want to be dealing with a thermal paste disaster. It will ruin your morning. So that's the story. That's the story of my PC part disaster. I'm glad everything's working now, because I was literally thinking, if my PC doesn't turn on, I can't do my streams. I can't work on any videos. I have meetings today. I'm just like, what on earth am I gonna do if this computer doesn't turn on? So I'm glad it's okay.